Well, this comes to no surprise, really. If you've been following what's been going on in the news, just general, shall we say, British public opinion in general, this is a really worrying statistic because we're going to go through an article from True Publica, and we are, as they say here, they're on a verge of a moment of repeating one of our most dangerous moments in history. And in one of their uh, surveys that they did, they found that, not 20%, 40%, which again is worrying itself, of people who responded would not care if the Prime Minister went against Parliament and the rule of law to get something done. That should worry a lot of people out there. That should send alarm bells ringing. There's already been interesting article. I don't know if we'll go through it, but you remember the guy who got sacked, who literally was sacked last week because he promoted like eugenics and all this other ridiculous stuff, and he was like a member of an advisor to the government, and I'm like, how the hell should he even be allowed there? The response to some of what I've read from that has been that that was just a test run to see how far the public was ready for someone from the alt-right to step in. And the alt-right are very, very quite fashy. So this is a really worrying moment for our democracy, and a lot of people out there think for some reason this could never happen in the UK. But it can happen to any democracy when people fall asleep and are not paying attention. And hopefully people will start to wake up and realise, especially what the Tories are doing. So, here we are. So, it was only last April that the Hansard Society, formed in 1944 to promote parliamentary democracy, published its audit of political engagement. Unbelievably, it is now lower even than at the depths of the crisis over MPs' expenses. And that, again, was worse on record by some margin. Almost 3/4 of those asked in Hansard's audit said that the system of governments needed significant improvement, and other attitudes emerged as that challenge core tenets to our democracy. The audit's authors stated it predicted that Britain was on a verge of actually embracing authoritarianism. And so it has come to pass. We have Boris Johnson. Since his election in December, he has promised to do what the people seemingly want, and that is to tear down the establishment and rebuild it. Presumably this time for the benefit of everyone, not just the few. So far as we know, the four pillars that uphold our current workings of civil society are to be reformed. They are to be phrased like it. This reformation of the judiciary, the legislature, and media are to bend to the wills of the executive, and henceforth Britain will have its autocrat, Boris Johnson, supported by a tyrannical Dominic Cummings and a fascical government, aka Patel, Raab, and etc. But what happens when the voting public finds out that the Reformation, far from being a reconstructed to their benefits, is A, making the wealthier more so, and B, no longer giving the right to democratorial change. And soon, the British government, more precisely Number 10, will be completely immersed in scandal and drowning in disgrace. The Russia report is set to be explosive. The emergence of new information is on the edge of spilling out into the public domain. The Accruer scandal will soon blow up. Open racism and a new Windrush disgrace is bubbling away at the heart of government. Open warfare between ministers, advisers, and the civil service is tearing away at the seams of a veil thin of coordinated governments. The Hansard Society first subscribers here were Winston Churchill and Clement Attlee. and they would be turning in their graves if they were aware of the current state of affairs. This institution was warning a year ago that the system was so badly rigged and that the toxicity of Britain's political system is so soaked in corruption it will likely fall to a populist. What they also predict was that if a post-Brexit economic downturn became a reality, we will see a huge rise in right-wing extremism and a, quote, new leader will emerge. It is not clear if they meant by Boris Johnson, but I doubt it. Rose Carter was a senior policy officer with the group, and she said, "We are facing a crisis of political misunderstanding. And when people do not trust traditional political systems, they look elsewhere. That's when support for political extremes grow. Nearly 60% of people in Britain think that the country is in decline. About half believe they have no influence in elections. About half believe referendums solve nothing. About half think Brexit will solve all these problems. The other half thinks it will make the matters worse. But no one thinks it will be the same. We have left versus right, boomers versus millennials, black versus white, nationalists versus internationalists. Scotland wants independence, England won't give it. That's nothing in the middle, no compromise, no agreement. The last time Britain was in this mood, the English Civil War broke out. And that was also a battle of two ideologies about a political governance for the country, which dominated the land for over a decade. It was also about England, Scotland and Ireland. When it was over, a military dictator emerged. The country was soon facing complete anarchy, and in the end, after a considerable amount of social and economic upheaval, the Restoration period came about. Hope Not Hate, which monitors extremist groups, said the suspicion of politicians is coupled with a post-Brexit economic downturn. We could be fertile ground for far-right populist surge. The Hanson Society also said we are on the verge of a toxic recipe for the future of British politics, and in a politically dangerous situation, effectively a war without an enemy. The study compiled annually by the Democratic Charity found that when people were asked whether Britain needs a strong ruler to break the rules, 54% agreed and only 23% said no. In all, 42% of respondents agreed with the idea that many nationalist problems could be dealt more effectively, and this is from the said, if a government didn't have to worry so much about votes in Parliament. You read that right. And yes, I did read that right. It is terrifying. Over 40% of the adult population thinks democracy is now a waste of time. We are on the wrong path. Its trajectory, and you can see exactly where it's leading. If the economics, government advisors, experts and captain of industry are right, the post-Brexit economic downturn is almost upon us. So, what happens next? And that, ladies and gentlemen, is something that should be worrying us all. Because when 40% of your population here thinks that democracy is a waste of time, that's when even bad stuff and worse stuff after that starts to happen. And as they said there, fighting a war without an enemy, well, sooner or later you have to pick an enemy. And in a case like this, as we've seen in the past, it tends to be the enemy within. And who knows who they could go for? They could go for remaining migrants, people who aren't white, people who are different political beliefs. We don't know. This could be an incredibly worrying moment in our political history. And as I said here, we could be teetering on the precipice of total autocratic rule. And that is something that no one wants. And yet the Brexiteers claim that they want democracy, and yet not a single one of them is crying out to stop this.